Hi everyone. Today's GER is political systems, and our definition here gives us some clues as to what that means. So we have political systems such as monarchies, dictatorships, and democracies determine who has power, how they get it, and what they can do with it. So who's in charge, how did they get to be in charge, and what types of things are they allowed to do. Okay, we have 4 different types here. Please be sure you label the 7 continents and 5 oceans before you go any further. So the first bullet says, a theocracy is when religious leaders are also in charge of the government. So theo is religion or God, cracy, government, religion and government together. Most early civilizations and American civilizations were theocracies. So any of your River Valley civilizations you can mention as theocracies. I've drawn in the rivers there. Any of the American civilizations like the Aztec, the Maya, the Inca, those are all options in terms of theocracies. In a democracy, the citizens have a say in decisions made by the government. Again, crassy is government, demo people, people and the government. We have only studied this in Athens and Rome, and really Athens is where you want to focus. So Athens, Greece, I'll draw the arrow for you, is in the Greek peninsula there. They had a direct democracy. A lot of students want to choose democracy for other questions, but you should only choose democracy as an answer if it has something to do with Athens. Okay, absolutism is the opposite of a democracy. One person makes all of the decisions by him or herself. So they have absolute power. And we've studied this in a variety of places. You can take a look at Louis XIV in France, Peter the Great in Russia. You could draw an arrow to India because of Akbar the Great. Suleiman in the Ottoman Empire is another option. These leaders were all absolute rulers. They controlled everything. They made all of the decisions on their own. All right, and last but not least, under feudalism, power is decentralized to local leaders. So it is based on the exchange of land or labor for protection. It developed in both Western Europe after the fall of Rome and Japan. So Western Europe and Japan is the archipelago that looks like a comma. Both used feudalism. All right, multiple choice. Which statement represents a characteristic of democracy? So I want you to go ahead and look back up at the definition there. Keep in mind government and people. See if you can find an answer that has something to do with people's involvement in the government. Okay, number 2, one similarity in the policies of Louis XIV and Suleiman the Magnificent. So I listed these in an association with absolutism. And so we're looking for something that has to do with absolute rulers and them taking all of the power into themselves. And so your answer here is 3 because of the central government. They thought that they were the entire government, and so that power was centralized into them. Okay, number 3, the Magna Carta, the Glorious Revolution, and the writings of John Locke all contributed to Great Britain's development of. This is a difficult question if you haven't studied this in class yet, but the answer here is parliamentary democracy. And that is because a democracy, democracy means the people have a say, and the parliament was the way, the method that the people in Great Britain had a say in the government, and that they continue to have a say in the government. They have a limited monarchy. So you might have heard of the Queen of England or the King of England. They have those, but the king has very little power. For number 4, which political system is best described in the outline below? Decentralized government. That is only listed with one option in your 4 listed above, so please take a look at that. Based on loyalty and service. Code of chivalry. This is with knights in Europe. And there's a military elite. So those knights and their lords had a lot of power. So take a look at what you have and see if you can pick out the right answer there to go back up into those 4 types of government. Okay, I'm going to move forward to the document. Oops. So we can take a look at that. This document is about Peter the Great. So we have a picture here. We can't really understand what it says, right? So unless you can read Cyrillic, which was the language of Russia, which could end up being a really good piece of outside information. The word Cyrillic, that is the alphabet that the Russian language is written in. But when I look at this, it looks to me like someone is cutting off a beard. Okay, so someone's cutting off a beard. Let's take a look at the document and see if we can learn anything more. So, cutting off beard. So the document 1b says, a year later, in January 1700, Peter transformed persuasion into decree. So this means he passed laws. And remember, he's an example of an absolute ruler. So we want to see him as being able to make all of the laws. He says, with rolling drums in the streets and squares, it was proclaimed that all boyars, which is another word for Russian noble, government officials and men of property, so people that owned property, both in Moscow and in the provinces, were to abandon their long robes. Abandon their long robes and provide themselves with Hungarian or German-style caftans. So he's talking about clothing. So he's changing by law that people have to wear a particular type of clothing. The following year, a new decree commanded men to wear a waistcoat, breeches, gaiters, boots, and a hat in the French or German style. So these are part of Western Europe. And that was something that was important to Peter, to make Russia be more westernized, which would be a really great vocabulary word to include in your outside information. But what they're describing here is the process of westernization, of making Russia more like Western Europe. And you can see that with the clothing becoming more French and German and more Hungarian or German. Okay, and women to put on petticoats, skirts, bonnets, and Western shows. Later decrees, remember this is another word for laws, later laws prohibited or banned the wearing of high Russian boots and long Russian knives. Models of the new approved costumes were hung at Moscow's gates and in public places in the city for people to observe and copy. So they kind of hung up, mannequins with the right clothes on them. All who arrived at the gates in traditional dress, except peasants, were permitted to enter only after paying a fine. So you could enter in your regular clothes, but you had to pay a fine. And that's a way that Peter, as an absolute ruler, is able to reinforce his rule. So in terms of outside information, I've already listed a few things about Russia. In terms of the Cyrillic alphabet, Peter being an absolute ruler, and him wanting to westernize westernize Russia to be more like Europe, that you could use in terms of your outside information. You could also go back to what you learned about the Mongols, and that the Mongols had taken over Russia. They called it the Golden Horde, and cut Russia off from Europe. And so that really was a detriment to them once Europe was going through the Renaissance. And so Peter here is an example of Peter attempting to catch up to Western Europe. So in terms of your connections, you can make a connection to any other ruler you've studied that tried to enforce his law. And also anytime that you see clothing being a symbol of power. Thanks, everybody.